Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the book of Genesis. Today we'll be looking at Genesis chapters 24 through 27. Now, if you remember from our last reading in Genesis, Abraham has just buried his wife Sarah and has now purchased a piece of the promised land. And now Isaac is old enough that he should be married, so now he's looking to find him a wife. But he doesn't want it to be one of the women of the land. Why is that? Because he doesn't want him to be unequally yoked. It was important then, and it's just as important now. But also, I want you to pay attention to what Abraham's servant does here. And of course, we're in Genesis chapter 24. And when Abraham sends his servant prays to God, and he asks that God would help him to make the right choice. He wants to make the right choice for his master and for Isaac. And this is how a person of faith should act. They should lean on God in everything they do. So what happens next is something straight off the screen of like a Hallmark Christian movie, if you will. Rebecca, the one that God wants Isaac to marry, walks out as the servant arrives in the land in Abraham's homeland where his family is, which is where the servant was sent to find Isaac a wife. And she just happens to be the daughter of Abraham's brother, which is exactly what Abraham was hoping for. Okay, this is a Hallmark moment right here. And this was an answer to prayer. It's more than a Hallmark moment. And so then he explains that Rebecca was an answer to his prayer. And they respond by saying, well, who are we to question the Lord? And what an incredible response that is. Here's another case of people having so much faith in God that they simply believe. They didn't doubt. They didn't question. They said, who are we to question the Lord? So skipping ahead to verse 60, we see the prayer for Rebekah to be the mother of thousands and 10,000s. And we already know that this is going to come true because it is through Isaac that God is going to keep his covenant with Abraham. And Rebekah simply goes with Abraham's servant. She doesn't hesitate. She just says, I will go. If only we could all have that courage and that faith to respond to the Lord in the same way. And then that brings us to chapter 25. Chapter 25 begins with the death of Abraham after living 175 years. Then in verses 12 to 18, we see the descendants of Ishmael. Remember, Ishmael was the, I guess you'd say, illegitimate son that Abraham had with Hagar. And then starting with verse 19, we see the beginning of the line of God's chosen people. Isaac and Rebekah have two sons named Jacob and Esau. And it was actually prophesied while they were still in the womb that Esau, the elder, would serve Jacob. And we'll see later how this happens. And I say elder, meaning like how twins say, oh, I'm older because I'm 15 seconds older. Esau came out first, and Jacob grabbed his ankle on the way out, and so they came out together. But Esau came out first, and so it was prophesied when Rebekah was pregnant with these twins that two nations were in her womb. So these two nations will always be at odds with each other. When the twins are born, the first is called Esau, which means hairy, and the second is named Jacob, which means cheat. And we will find out soon that those are very appropriate names for these two children. This is because Jacob is born clinging to Esau's heel as though trying to overtake him to be born first. The twins grow up. Esau becomes a man of the great outdoors. He brings home wild game from his hunting trips, and that pleases Isaac, who loves the food. And then on the other side, you have Jacob, who is kind of a mama's boy. He stays at home and he helps with the cooking. So right here, you've got favorites already. Esau is Isaac's favorite, and Jacob is Rebekah's favorite. So one day, when Esau returns hungry, Jacob has some delicious stew prepared, and he actually tricks his brother Esau into selling him his birthright in exchange for some stew. Must be some good stew, or maybe Esau didn't value his birthright very much, which is probably the bigger issue. But before he lets him taste any of the stew, he makes him resign his rights as the elder son. And Esau, faced with the choice of food or future, takes the food without a second thought. So these birthrights were extremely important back then, and Esau has already traded it off to Jacob. The full meaning of Jacob is actually took by the heel, and it has the same sense of coming from behind, catching, spoiling, being determined to get what isn't his. And in later life, God will name Jacob Israel, which means wrestled. Jacob is a man who will never give up, and nor will the people who descend from him. So let's take a look at Isaac for a minute here. So, like his father Abraham, Isaac lives as a herdsman. God renews the promise to give him the land of Canaan and descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. They live among the Philistines, a vigorous pagan people. And like Abraham before him, Isaac is afraid that he might be killed by someone who wants to take his beautiful wife. And for a long time, he pretends that Rebekah is his sister. Does that sound familiar? Same old story here. He's challenged by the Philistine king Abimelech, who sees Isaac being more than brotherly to Rebekah. Isaac is prosperous and has large herds but no land. He has a constant problem getting water for his people and animals. He digs wells, but then has to move on because Abimelech's people come and take them. Something about Isaac's wealth and peaceableness impresses his neighbors. We saw clearly that the Lord was with you, it actually says in Genesis 26:28. And they say when they come to make a treaty, that's when they said it, and they agree to give Isaac some land at Beersheba. Meanwhile, Esau grows to manhood and marries pagan women. Yes, I said women as in plural. Esau has more than one wife, and they are not Christian. They're not followers. They were not Christians, but they were not followers of Christ. They were pagans. They were Canaanite women, and this was not good. So this distresses his parents. His parents were not happy about it. And remember, their marriage was completely ordained by God. God wanted them to be married. It's clear. Couldn't be more clear. Isaac expects Esau to inherit the promise, and his choice of wife will be important. But Esau doesn't care about those kinds of things. And so now we're going to focus on Jacob here, and that's really where our story is going to turn here, starting in chapter 27. Jacob is cunning and hardworking. He's an underdog who somehow always comes out on top, sometimes by being a little dishonest. He's an unpleasant and selfish young man, but God blesses him anyway. In due course, he will become Israel and give his name to a nation. And so we're going to see in chapter 27 how Jacob, he's already stolen Esau's birthright. Now he's going to steal his blessing from his father Isaac. So when Isaac is old and blind, the time comes for him to bless his successor. And he sends Esau to catch something for a tasty meal. And after he has eaten, he'll give him the special blessing, which passes the promise of God from father to his firstborn son. Now Rebekah heard this, and she has other ideas. While Esau is away, she dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes so he smells like him. He disguises his arms and neck with goat skin, so he puts these things on so when Isaac touches him, he will feel his hairy arms, and sends him to Isaac with a tasty dish. Okay, they just take one of the flock and they cook it up, and Isaac is suspicious at first because how could you be back so soon? But he accepts the food and the drink, and by the time Esau returns, Jacob has already stolen his brother's blessing. Now this blessing is unique. It's not transferable. Esau is very upset, and there's no question of Isaac taking it back. It can't be done. All he can promise Esau is a life of conflict and discontent. Now, it's interesting that this happens this way because this was already prophesied to happen. So God knew that all of this was going to happen, and Isaac knew that Jacob, he'd heard the prophecy. He had heard that these sons were going to be like this. So I wonder how they didn't ever expect anything like this, if you know what I'm saying. But Isaac has already blessed Jacob. He cannot take it back. And now Esau is entrenched as the number two, as Jacob has gotten the main blessing. And Esau, remember, he didn't care that much about the birthright, but now the blessing he does care about. And Esau is so angry that he's ready to murder his brother as soon as he gets the chance. He has made that decision that he's going to murder Jacob the first chance he gets. So he is going to have to run for his life. And that's where we'll pick this story up next week, starting in chapter 28. So I'll see you tomorrow in the book of Judges.